And this is what I love about a DevOps Days conference. You plug into the AV and it works the first time. So awesome. I love it. Thank you all, honestly, for having me here. This is my second time presenting at a DevOps Days conference. It's really a great honor. I'm a huge fan of punk rock music, and one of my favorite things about these conferences is there's a really huge DIY aesthetic to a lot of these conferences. So really thank you not only to the organizers, but to the crew and to all the everyone that paid a ticket to come here and listen to me and all the other speakers speak. It's fantastic. Thank you very much. With that said, I'm Christian. Just to do a little bit of housekeeping, this is how you get a hold of me. That email looks fake. It's not. The website is just a bare Jekyll template that I need to fix. But if you want to get a hold of me, if you want to talk, that's the way to do it. Something that I'm also learning doing a lot of these conferences, apparently Twitter handles are a thing. I just signed up like a month ago. My Twitter handle is on the top right of every slide. So as we go through this, if you have any feedback for me, because I feel like this subject is a moving target, and I'm always learning about this as well, feel free to either DM me or tweet me or whatever the preferred nomenclature is. Let's talk about it, because I think these are things and these are lessons that we can really think about in terms of getting better as not only individuals, but as organizations. And it would be good if I plugged in the I tried using my mind, but it wasn't the best. Oh, no.
Interesting. Can you just try plugging?
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Okay.
I think.
Do you have a native USB?
I don't.
Okay, your slides are back.
Ah, there we go. All right, we're good. So what are we talking about, aside from AV difficulties? I'm a developer. I like to say sort of. My background was financial technology before coming to GitHub over the last 3 years. And I do things at GitHub. So no sense in talking about what I do at GitHub. We can talk about it afterwards. But really the most important thing about GitHub for me was that it was my first remote workplace. Like maybe some of you in the audience, I worked in a traditional office environment, and coming to GitHub, it was a little bit of a culture shock and sort of a wake-up call to work discipline by being in a remote organization. And so I think we've done a pretty good job at like enabling and empowering developers and engineers and people in the entire business to work remote. And I really want to share some of my own experiences with you and figuring out what we can learn from there as well. And then really, the big interest in what I have when it comes to this is really about enterprise community building. And what I mean by that is that I've seen not only the power of transparency and community within GitHub itself, but I've also seen that in the open source community. And really a lot of what I've turned my job into is trying to take those tenets of just being nice and being kind and having empathy and humility for our fellow human beings and applying that to the workspace. So with that said, I want to take a step back and think about a history of the software development industry as a whole. In the grand scheme of history, our industry is fairly young, right? If we think back to some of the earliest large-scale software development projects, the first one that comes to mind for me is Margaret Hamilton and the Apollo 11 rocket. She did such a kick-ass job of building this rocket that went out into space and did amazing space things. And in the scope of where that project was, it was approximately 100,000 lines of code managed by a team of developers and engineers that worked in a small office together. There was no idea, there were very crude ideas of source code management, and there wasn't a lot of geo-distribution of people together, people separated. Now, what we've seen in the industry as a whole is a couple different things have happened. One, not only have the projects that we've been working on become much more complex, but the people element has become much more distributed as well. So we think about the space shuttle going from the Apollo 11 rocket went from 100,000 lines of code to 400,000 lines of code within 20 years. And if we jump forward and we think about the Ford F-150, I think, which is probably one of the, it's not necessarily a modern marvel, but I think it's probably one of the more complex pieces of software out there. It's essentially a roving data center. It's a moving data center at 150 million lines of code, if we account for all of the open source libraries and all the modules and all the development that goes into place with that. So we've got very complex projects that we're working on, and we're solving very difficult problems. Now with that, we've seen at scale a situation where people are becoming much more distributed. We know that as an organization, the people that we're hiring are not only in the same office that we're working in, but they're also in different parts of the world. So what we've seen is we've seen this move from just small teams in an office to more geo-distributed teams across many time zones. And we've seen that work really well in the open source space in terms of large-scale projects being able to work and being able to serve the community. But a lot of organizations are really struggling to take that ethos and that mindset of how do I manage all of these people? How do I get them to do their best work while making them feel like they're safe and they belong? And so when we think about that, right, I also have a lot of pictures of dogs in here. So if you're a dog person, I love you. If not, I still love you. But they're pretty cute. So if we think about that, right, let's take a step back, right? Let's think about an employee that goes into an organization for the first time, right? And let's say this organization has already taken that step forward in terms of being able to identify that, yes, I am a remote-first company, and yes, I am going to enable developers, right? And maybe they hire a person that has never worked in a remote work environment before. And it's really exciting, right? Because that company comes to you and says, hey, your talents are needed, they're wanted, we want to hire you, we're going to pay you a fair salary. It's going to be great, it's going to be awesome. And so that employee joins the organization and goes through a really incredible onboarding process where you get to spend 2 weeks at the headquarters. You get to meet people that maybe you're not directly working with, but you're going through that. You're meeting people that are all across the business, and you're learning all of these nice things. And you don't see the difference between an office environment and a remote work environment. So you go through that, and you think, OK, I can handle this. This is pretty awesome. There's a really great energy here. This company is doing great things, and I really want to contribute. So you spend your 2 weeks. You fly home. You sit down at your desk. Bring out the keyboard, turn on the laptop, and then that's it. It's on you to contribute. And that's hard. I don't know about you, but when I went through that and I sat down at that keyboard, all of a sudden I realized I didn't have that social dynamic. I didn't have that interaction with people on a daily basis. And so, yes, I had my dog in here. I had my dog with me to hang out with me, but all of a sudden, the weight of the world was crushed on me because all of a sudden, I didn't have anybody to rely on. I didn't have anybody to interact with. I was just on my own in that office. And that's where imposter syndrome comes in, right? That's where we start thinking that we're not good enough. We start questioning why our organizations hired us in the first place. And it can be really isolating, and it can be really a hit to our self-esteem because we don't know what we don't know, right? And so for a lot of organizations, it comes down to culture, right? We need to figure out what that culture is to empower developers to curtail imposter syndrome, right? So the question I ask of you is, what is your community's culture? And I don't say company, because I think every place that we work at is a community of people. It's people that are contributing and people that are doing their best to make everyone feel welcome within the scope of their organization. So Peter Block defines communities in two aspects. Peter Block being a researcher that studies what it actually means to be an organization and what it means to be a community, either in physical space or in enterprise organizations as well. And so he defines organizations in two aspects, and communities in two aspects. Communities can either be restorative or they can be retributive. Meaning, if we have a piece of software and there's a bug in that software, and I committed a line of code that contributed to that bug. If I am in a retributive community, it's a traditional law and order type of community, meaning that bug gets released to production, we fix it, but then we go into meetings, we go into research to figure out who delivered that bug and to deliver some sort of retribution, some sort of punishment to that person. I don't know about you, but I've worked in those types of organizations, and it sucks because I don't feel like I can do the best work of my ability if every time that I mess up, that I have to justify not only my own existence, but the type of work that I'm doing. And so how do I learn from that, right? If all I'm doing is being put into a non-physical prison every time that I am put into a code analysis, it can be very difficult to want to not only feel safe to do my best work, but it also makes me feel less motivated to stay in that organization. And I've left companies because of that very reason. Now, if we think about restorative communities, it's a complete mind shift in terms of what we're doing as engineers and as employees at organizations, meaning a restorative community almost takes away the capitalistic nature of knowledge and the way that we perceive knowledge, meaning that the traditional economic model of how I view knowledge, meaning if I commit a piece of code, it is a transaction, meaning that if I submit that, I'm expecting something in return. And so we have to get into this aspect of where we're thinking more about the community and the communal aspect of what we're doing with our knowledge within our organization. Meaning if I open a pull request, I don't expect anything in return. And that's where I think a lot of organizations get tripped up, right? Because it's something like this. That also sucks. Because a lot of organizations, and we know this as DevOps professionals, and we know this as people that are highly aware that a lot of organizations are undergoing digital transformation today, or DevOps transformation, or DevSecOps. I think that's the new hotness, right? Everyone is going through this sort of digital transformation, and it becomes a top-down initiative for a lot of companies, and they think they can just implement culture change from the top and expect people to be on board, right? So I'm going to listen to you, but I'm not actually going to listen to you. And it's going to appear that everything is fine, but then we still have problems with retention. We still have problems with people feeling empowered. We have problems with, like in my own case, I joined a financial services organization and I lasted less than 15 months because I was tired of the silos. I was tired of the bickering. I was tired of being in stand-ups where I would have to literally scream to get my message and my voice heard. And I'm not a very good screamer. This is about as loud as I go. So I think it comes down to 3 main bullet points. And I apologize for the closed caption covering it, but at least you get a dog and a cat. I think honest transformation to build a culture within an organization comes down to three core principles. It comes down to honesty, it comes down to transparency, and it's what I talked about previously, community. So what do I mean by that? I think in terms of being able to enable a remote workforce, you have to be honest. Now, a lot of organizations view honesty by this sense of real talk, right? How many people have had that sort of real talk conversation, right? Did you feel good after it, or did you feel pretty bad? Excuse my language, but I felt shitty about it. Every time that I have a real talk conversation, I feel really bad at the end of it. Because a lot of organizations, not all, take that real talk sort of perception and that culture that they build around that as sort of a way to provide really critical feedback without any sort of layer or abstraction of empathy, right? We don't empathize with each other as human beings enough. And so when I talk about honesty, it's about humility. It's about being empathetic. It's about connecting with the people that you're working with on a daily basis. We move into transparency where we move into this mindset where we're open by default, right? That is, I think, one of the best things about open source is that we have this ability to allow any user on a public repository to be able to come in, take a repo, and contribute to it in some way or another. We don't do that in a lot of enterprise organizations. At least we say we do. We think about that sharing. We can only share under certain pretenses, or we can only share with certain people. And we talk about, a lot of organizations, especially in the Fortune 50 and 100, talk about this idea that we're going to have like a D&I method. We're going to have a movement towards diversity and inclusion. But then when it comes down to actually sharing information across the business, we're still picking and choosing the people that we want to share with. So we're not actually mitigating any sort of unconscious bias. And we're not helping remote developers feel empowered to contribute. We're still picking and choosing our battles. I think at the end of the day, what this means is that everyone's a contributor. If we're open by default, we're not assuming any sort of gap in knowledge, or we're not assuming that a person cross-functionally on one side of the business can contribute in one way or another or cannot. We don't think about the developer that lives in 6 time zones away and the way that they can contribute, or if they're on one project or another. So we have to get there. How do we get there? Especially, how do we build a community, especially at an organization like GitHub, where we have 900 employees now, where 600 of those are remote? How do we build that community? We've talked about all these great values, but how do we actually get there to that point where we're feeling included as part of GitHub as a whole? I think there are things that we've done really well that I want to share with you in terms of having people feel internally connected to the entire business, right? Because I think at the end of the day, I think what's happening is that the way that we're delivering product and the way that we're writing code, we're only going to do our best work if we feel socially included. We want to feel like we're part of a bigger picture, right? I don't want to feel like I'm just writing spec. And so, more dogs. That one's really cute. You should have seen my Google search when I was putting this together, side tangent. It was just like dog in suit, dog at work, dogs feeling together. I have no shame about that. Back on track. So when it comes to transparency and people feeling included, right, one of the things that we've done such a great job at is that on your first day, you become a contributor to GitHub in a couple of different ways. We have an internal social media site that on your very first day, there's an announcement made of your anointment to GitHub, right? It's almost like a religious experience. It's your very first day. I'm going to contribute. And how am I going to contribute, right? If I'm a person that doesn't necessarily know how to contribute, we're going to have you open a pull request. And what we're going to have you do is open a pull request about yourself, meaning I'm going to tell you who I am. I'm going to tell you what team I'm on. And I'm going to give you a fun fact, right? And again, this isn't the top-down initiative of you have to do this. You can certainly pass on it. But it's a way for you to start feeling connected to your fellow human being. And some of them are short and sweet, and some of them I've seen have been several paragraphs long. But it's just really about building that culture of I am safe here, and I can allow myself to be vulnerable with my other fellow human beings, and we're going to take care of each other to do that. We're going to take care of each other while doing that. One of the other huge things that I think is really important, the dogs got covered up a little bit. That's OK. You can see mine on the left. He's the most important. Now, one of the greatest things that has happened to remote organizations, I think, is chat ops, right? Now, whether or not we debate about history in terms of chat ops being a thing since the days of IRC, that's here nor there. What I think has happened, though, is we've thought about chat ops only in the production aspect, right? We're going to do our deployments from chat ops or from chat. We're going to do all of our monitoring, all of our notifications, so on and so forth. And we've done that at GitHub. You can certainly, if you're contributing to a code base and you want to deploy from Slack, you can certainly do that. But I think what's more interesting and feeling more connected are the non-work related things that we do. Things like having a dog chat room where I can go in and spam the room with photos of my dog. By spam, maybe once a day. We have rooms called the danger room, where it's an off-topic room, where I don't necessarily have to talk about work. And let's think about that from a traditional office environment, right? We have those things already in traditional office environments. The danger room is the water cooler. The dog room is sometimes bring your dog to work day. And we have those things because we're making up for the fact that we can't do that in physical space, in meet space. One of the other things that I really love is this idea, and was part of the inspiration for the title, was the idea of sparkles, which I view as social capital. And so what's a sparkle? It's the stupidest and the funnest thing that I've ever seen an organization do. And I mean that in the most lovingly way. A sparkle is a free-form method of emoji currency within GitHub that says anytime that I do something interesting, mentionable, or just somebody wants to give it to me, we have a chat up command that says sparkle that user. And we trust that our community and our employees will use it for the right reasons, and we've not seen any reason otherwise. But it allows really to build that significance and build that sort of history that you're not getting in physical space. Now, I will say with this, because it is a form of currency, and I did talk about sort of the transactional model of knowledge, this is not a metric of any means by what you're contributing to your organization. This is just a fun way to make us feel included and like we belong. Now, when it comes to community, because we can talk about all the things that we're doing in non-physical space, but at the end of the day, we like to be with each other. We're very, humans are, the gentleman that spoke yesterday from Puppet about neurodiversity talked about us being social animals, and we are, but we are not designed to be isolated. We are designed to be together physically. And so we've done a really great job at this in terms of allowing people to come together with as little friction as possible. Meaning, if you're a remote employee at GitHub, and I want to come visit the office, I can do that 4 times a year without any business justification at all. So if I want to just come together and be with people and soak in the environment because the headquarters is a pretty cool place, I can come do that. And I don't have to necessarily go through 3 levels of bureaucracy and approvals and justification. It's just a thing we do. Because we know that the best ideas and the innovation that you want as a software company comes off of those hallway conversations. That's why I think conferences are probably one of my most favorite things, because it's not the ideas that I talk about and I share on stage. It's talking with participants and audience members in the hallways and figuring out ways to be better. And we know that, right? We know that happens, and so we allow for that. We also have team summits and we have company summits that we also do as well, because that allows us to not only meet with our team, but allows us to understand different parts of the business. Because there may not necessarily be many times where Alice and I work together. We work on 2 totally separate different teams at GitHub. But there is value in understanding what each of us does. And if we don't have that physical space, things like team summits and company summits allow us to do that as well. So it's ongoing, right? It's not just these values that sort of drive the culture. There are also hard rules that I've seen in terms of things that we need to think about, right? And hard tools that we have that allow us to do that. And so I think one of the things that is the most important thing that I've seen at GitHub to help remote employees feel like they can contribute is that a calendar is a sacred thing. Meaning, I don't mess with it. I respect other people's calendars. And when I am trying to schedule time with a person who's remote, I don't just blindly try and block their calendar. I reach out and I talk to them. Because how often have we been in situations where maybe your calendar's open, but you get neck deep into a problem or a situation, and you're getting into that zone, but then all of a sudden you get a calendar invite, and then you're broken out of your rhythm. Or you have personal events that you want to take care of as well. So we think about that as a way that, as an inalienable right, that we have our calendars and we stick to them, and we don't overwrite. The other thing that I think about, and that's for the caption there, it's a cat being photographed. I think it's the one of 2 cats on my slides here. Streamlined video services, right? You can't have people interacting physically all the time with a remote organization. So if we think about that, what we need then is a tool that will allow us to not only quickly jump on a meeting, but allows people to jump on with as little friction as possible. So we use Zoom at GitHub, which I think has been pretty great for us. We've got that integrated directly into our chat so that if I'm having a long, drawn-out conversation within Slack, I can then begin to think about, well, maybe the tone or maybe the conversation that I'm having isn't necessarily being best displayed on text. So I can just do a .zoom me, have a URL, and then we have chat ready to go within our team as well. I'm sorry, video chat ready to go within our team as well. It has to be easy to use. So if, I'll make a broad statement here that says if you are an organization using a service like Skype for Business or Link or what GoToMeeting, ditch them. Just get rid of them. Because they're hard to use. I feel like even GoToMeeting, I'm always installing a new plugin every time I do it. And it's like 2 minutes out of my time every time that I'm doing it. It's a waste. So let's think about easy ways we can do that as well. We also have internal social media. And I know this sounds weird, but I think it's super important because I think it allows us not only to build our own identity, but it allows us to share across the business. Some things that we've done in the past include building lightning profiles. So when you joined GitHub for a while, we had video profiles that you would make, and you would introduce yourself. Because a lot of times when we're interacting with each other over common text or just text, there's a lot of times we don't necessarily understand tone, and we don't understand sarcasm, and we don't understand how people are talking. So we have video profiles that allow us to feel like we're together. It allows people to understand what that person's personality is like. Then within my profile, I can just have nice things about myself, including my favorite basketball team, which is the worst basketball team of all time. It's tough, man. I live in Chicago now, and I used to tell people it was like being a Cubs fan, but they're good now, so it's the worst. Maybe I like it. I don't know. But it's about identity, right? It's about me being able to share that, right? It's having my contact information on there if I choose to share it. But then we also have the internal social feed that we share with people. And this is free form. So there's no expectation that anything that we post on the social feed is just work-related. It can be anything. And again, we trust in our community and our users to do the right thing and post things that are fairly work-appropriate. But it's really about sharing what we're doing and getting everybody on board. Because I think for a lot of companies, if we think about evolving, and we think about like what Mark Andreessen says about every company being a software company, Satya Nadella saying that every company is going to rely on SaaS services. If we think about like where we want to be in the marketplace and where we want to be, we have to think about innovation, right? And so, like I said earlier, innovation only comes from that moment, that aha moment, where I feel like I'm safe to contribute. I've been going through a book by Simon Sinek, who does a lot of TED Talks and does a lot of research into like corporate psychology and all these really, really awesome things. So he's got this book called Leaders Eat Last. And in there, he's got a story about lions and antelopes, right? And when an antelope senses danger from a lion, that antelope tends to freeze up. And everything that they're doing is based on survival. So your survival instincts kick in. And all of a sudden, everything that I was doing before doesn't matter. I'm just doing this thing to survive. And sometimes the antelope can get away, and sometimes the antelope doesn't. And so what he's saying there is that if at work, the only thing that we're thinking about and doing is being in survival mode and paying off that technical debt and trying to justify our bugs and all of that, we're not doing our best work. And if we feel isolated and we don't know how to contribute, we're not doing our best work. And if we're not doing our best work, I'm going to go out on a limb and say we're not innovating. Organizations are not innovating. And I know that's a lot to take in, and it's a tough message, but I think a lot of organizations really need to think about that. Because it's us that's providing that for them as well. So that's what I've got for you. Like I said, I don't want to leave this on a sad note, but these are my dogs, or my dog. Cute. His name's MJ, Michael Jordan. He jumps a lot. But I'll leave you with this. I used to do improv classes about 10 years ago, and it was probably one of the most fun things that I've ever done. And one of the improv coaches that I went with, she had this saying that I thought was really interesting, because when we talk about all of these sort of like concepts, it can be really hard to take in and to digest. And sometimes our first instinct is when we're being told these things, it's to say, well, that sounds great, but I don't think I could do it in my company or my organization because of reasons, right? And so she used to have this great saying where if somebody would get on stage and we would be in a game where somebody has to play a character that they don't want to play, she would just simply say, "Would it kill you to play along?" And I think that's fantastic. So when you're out there in your organizations, think of that, because I think that's really going to help your organizations not only help your remote employees, but it will help your organization as a whole become better. So my name's Chris. That's what I've got for you. I really appreciate the time, and I hope to chat with you guys after.